Good.
So I had Claude Code build me the Claude of War, which I will link to in the show notes. A responsible approach to killing people. Developed by Wario Amade, it said that at Anthropic, we believe that if AI is going to end human life, it should do so thoughtfully with a full chain of thought, reasoning, and clear audit trail. Wario Amade also greets us with the quote on the landing page: "My brother wrote Machines of Love and Grace, a beautiful essay about how AI might make everyone's lives a little nicer. I wrote Machines of Loving Death." Happy Friday, 8:51, February 27th. We are now 8 hours and counting from the 5:01 deadline that Pete Hegseth set. Eric, take us away.
Yeah. So why are we talking about Anthropic? It is one of maybe a half dozen industry leaders in agentic AI, large language modeling. And Anthropic, if you asked about it, I don't know, maybe 9 months ago or a year ago, I don't think it would be necessarily spoken of in the same sentence as OpenAI's work or DeepSeek. But they have been on a breakout run, primarily because Claude has demonstrably shifted the way people are interacting with AI-enabled coding. The tension at the moment is that Anthropic has, for reasons that remain unclear, caught the hostile attention of the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. And it does seem to be, and I hope our conversation sort of corrects this, it seems almost like a mission that Pete Hegseth has taken on his own. There are much more powerful people in the administration insofar as AI and cybersecurity or crypto go, like David Sachs, who don't seem to be on this anti-Anthropic campaign, but Pete Hegseth is taking it to heart and has threatened both Defense Production Act authorities to be levied against Anthropic among a variety of other cudgels, should Anthropic still be reluctant to effectively open its code to the full suite of military affairs.
So we've got a few dynamics going on, and I think we should start perhaps with the inauguration, where you had Sam Altman and the rest of the tech CEO elite all there with big smiles.
Together.
Greg Brockman donating $25 million to the Trump super PAC or something. And then Dario kind of being on the sidelines. Like, he's missed some of these meetings. I think it's clear that his politics don't, and the rest of, and a good chunk of Anthropic's founding team don't necessarily align with where this administration is. And that was fine. David Sachs made fun of them for being woke AI. But as Eric said, it's all well and good until this is the market leader, which they have been for the past 6 months. In a sort of like ironic twist of fate, the market leader, which is most, which like has the most like Fed ramping going on. So apparently only since this past week was Grok able to play on classified networks. Before that, it was Anthropic, which was most kind of integrated in the various things that the Department of War gets up to. And Anthropic tried to kiss the ring. It was reported in the Wall Street Journal that they asked 1789 Capital, Donald Jr.'s VC fund, to get in on their past round. They said no. And now the knives are out.
There's two sticking points here. One of which is the, don't put us in killbots thing, which is like, all right, we can talk about that at a technical level. But like, there's also the no domestic surveillance part, which is kind of the part where everyone, like, even talking to friends on the Hill, where they're like, hey, that's kind of weird. So like, I would like to know, I think the public deserves to know more details about like, what is this fight specifically actually about, not whatever is in the public. On the defense contracting as an LLM thing, like, look, if you have contracts with defense contractors, or if you have contracts with the DoD, I hate to tell you this, but the DoD is going to do DoD things, right? And so if your frustration is that, your model is being used to support warfighting operations where people die. I'm not familiar with many warfighting operations where people don't die.
Humanitarian missions.
Well, yes, and I don't really know what business you were getting into, so I think there's some issues
here's the
there.
nuance. Here's the nuance here is the way I read the blog post is not that we are categorically opposed to our model killing people. It's more like, look, it's not ready for game time. We can do cute things around the edges, but the sort of downside risk of putting our models, at the very pointy end of a kill chain is likely to get the wrong people killed or even get our own people killed.
Well,
and the analogy that I'm kind of going to is like almost a reverse Arthur Miller, All My Sons, where they're selling, something which is like qualified to like go 200 miles an hour. And then the DoD is like, no, we're going to have it, go at 400 miles an hour, but like it will just fly apart. And they don't want to be a part of that.
And that's fine. But I'll also say for the audience here, right, there's basically two types of AI for the DoD. There's the in the bot or, in a control node for the bot. Right. And that is autonomy for perception, to do on the loop operations. Per DoD 3000.09, it states pretty explicitly what you can and cannot do when it comes to these machines. So unless we've rewritten the DoD, the guidance for the Pentagon is still 3000.09. And then there's kind of at the higher level, the C2 echelon, which is like we're going to control like a bunch of things, or we're going to control logistics, or we're going to do planning, right? I don't really know specifically what the instance was with Venezuela, like where Claude fit into that. And who knows if Claude could have just been making maps.
Or like
and they said they weren't even upset about it.
Yeah, it was probably like an information operations officer queried Claude and just said, hey, give me the top 10 Spanish language broadcasts that are going to speak up about this, which is like perfectly responsible. And yeah, you can say on the margins, I supported the operation, but there's no MH47 crew chief or pilot who's using Claude to do a load plan.
Yeah, you can't just it takes a lot of work to take an LLM like Claude and just dump it into a war bot. Like it's not, and maybe somebody did that, but that's,
that's exactly, I think you're also seeing a little bit of that personality of Amadei and Anthropic more generally versus like Anduril, Palantir, where they will sell something that is a 20% solution and be like, this thing will revolutionize warfare. And that's a very important distinction. Like you have a person who's like very cautious about like, hey, I don't know that this is going to fit the parameters of what I'm being told it can do. I'm going to be truth in advertising. I'm uncomfortable if that's where you're saying this is going today. That just sounds like a more frank discussion on how things are getting used.
So what we're saying is Dario rejected the offer to become a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve,
among other things. But I mean, like, I think when you couple that, look, that's the two things, right? That I think that the DoD, in my mind, is leaving on the table. There's, could you have a defense contractor now? Anthropic is a defense contractor, whether they want to be or not. Like they have sold something to the Department of Defense, who is telling the truth. That's novel. That's a cool break in tradition. The other thing is, like the DoD could just, I don't know, say, yes, of course, we're not going to do surveillance on Americans because of posse comitatus and the FISA court rulings and all of the other things that say we can't do that unless there is a warrant, which supersedes everything else. And then then you take away both of Amadei's complaints, and then it's like it's not an issue. But instead, we have an ultimatum where it's just no. I don't want to tell you anything. I don't want to say that I have any restrictions.
Yeah, I think to wrap this up, this is a kind of a case of egos at minimum here.
Wait, before we close on that, let me like read their little paragraph on fully autonomous weapons. So this is from a Dario statement from yesterday. Partially autonomous weapons like those used today in Ukraine are vital to the defense of democracy. Even fully autonomous weapons, that those that take humans out of the loop entirely and automate selecting and engaging targets, may prove critical for our national defense. But today, frontier AI systems are simply not reliable enough to power fully autonomous weapons. We will not knowingly provide a product that puts America's warfighters and civilians in risk. We have offered to work directly with the Department of War on R&D to improve the reliability of those systems, but they have not accepted this offer. In addition, without proper oversight, fully autonomous weapons cannot be relied upon to exercise the critical judgment that our highly trained professional troops exhibit every day. They need to be deployed with proper guardrails, which don't exist today.
Yeah, and I think that's a fine statement.
He's saying his product is TRL5.
Yeah, 100%.
And in acquisition speak, he's giving a fair assessment. I think Justin did trigger something that's really important here, is that among like the Stargate participants and the inauguration attendees, saying I'm not ready is culturally weird, because you're supposed to say we're going to be driving cars on Mars in 6 months.
Yeah. And I think when the leader, very clearly in some very key categories, the leader of AI development in the U.S. is saying, hey, this stuff is not ready for what we're saying it is. That's also a cultural push that is different than what the DoD has been encountering. And I worry that that is also driving some of this, where they want everybody to get in line because that is more in line with what we're saying our capabilities are. And that's actually the real danger to Anthropic coming out and saying, this stuff's not ready. Like if we're top of the line, this stuff's not going to do what we think it's going to do.
Well, and back to the C2 thing, like that does matter, because if that's what, Claude's going to do, right? I don't know. I presume that's what you're going to use a very powerful LLM for. Then congratulations. If something goes bad, you're responsible for a mass casualty incident or war crime, right?
Claude made me do it.
Yeah. And that's that is, I think, smart on Anthropic's part to fight that.
Can we do the domestic surveillance? I mean, what domestic surveillance does the Department of War do?
Well, so NSA
goes through NSA.
Weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the department has certain intelligence collection authorities that are supposed to be internationally oriented, but there are support to law enforcement missions. There are bundles of authority out there that the department can employ in a variety of different circumstances. But to Tony's point, it is about NSA governance.
Yeah. I mean, like during the protest in both during the Trump one and then some of the No Kings protests that happened at the beginning of Trump 2, there, the report of Air Force drones doing surveillance over the protest crowds.
And CBP in Minnesota.
Yeah, exactly. And the courts have already said, hey, yes, that was legal, but we need to get more defined. Like the guidance needs to be more defined on what this can be, because while technically you were within the bounds of the law, we don't agree that was the intent of this law going forward. So they have asked for the courts have asked for clarification on those points. We have an intelligence apparatus that, yes, it uses manpower from the DoD, but overwhelmingly that's through warrants, not through just because the DoD decides they want to do collection or surveillance on Americans.
Yeah, if you're covering a U.S. person, it should be covered under FISA rules.
Right? Yeah. So I would just say, like the like covering an American, like if you're overseas and you're doing intelligence reporting, even to the point like you're going out to embassy functions and you meet somebody and you want to come back and write up like, hey, I met this person and they said this interesting thing to me. If that person is an American citizen that happens to be living abroad, man, there's all kinds of restrictions that start coming into play on like how you collect it, how that person is safeguarded, how we make sure that their identity is protected. Like those all apply to the DoD and just to the intelligence service kind of writ large. That's even external to the U.S. Now, again, you come back into the U.S., conceivably the FISA court is a bulwark against massive internal surveillance.
to illustrate that exact point, when I started at the National Counterterrorism Center back in, this was like 15 years ago, I was kind of a low-level analyst, and then I moved into being an intelligence briefer. And we had a pilot program that Attorney General Holder had negotiated, where certain analysts at NCTC and elsewhere in the Director of National Intelligence Apparatus would have access to all of CIA and NSA reporting, but we would also have access to a substantial amount of FBI reporting. So we had sort of the Gorgon stare, both domestically and internationally. And I was part of a small team that had access to raw FISA that we had collect on U.S. persons overseas. We could get like their Facebook pages or whatever. And it was highly controlled. We had to go through very special training to gain access to it. And one morning, it was a little bit slow. I was going into kind of a mundane briefing day, so I queried some raw files related to some other reporting that we had, and just didn't find anything interesting, and just moved about my day. When I was done with my morning briefings, I was back at my desk. I got a call from the Department of Justice that they said, "Hey, we noticed you ran these queries, and we're going to talk to you about it because this is unusual behavior." And I had an attorney from the National Security Division inspecting my queries into the system, because there was a recognition that what I was doing required an extraordinary degree of oversight. And I was completely above board. Granted, I never queried raw FISA again because I didn't want to talk to a Department of Justice attorney, but the system is supposed to have guardrails, and something that we have to thread through this discussion with Anthropic, or targeted killing the Caribbean, or forthcoming military campaign in Iran. There's not really a functioning Office of General Counsel at the department right now.
Yeah.
And that OGC is not taking sort of an adversarial look at the actions of services and components. It sees itself as a sort of a personal law firm on behalf of the secretary, and to an extent the deputy secretary. So when I make glancing references to normal intelligence collection guardrails, um, I am sympathetic to people like the head of Anthropic or other Defense Department contractors who are dealing with these people, and they recognize that there is no legal architecture that's governing what they're saying. And before I hold the floor for another moment, I was speaking socially with a fairly senior representative of a defense prime recently, and this was after the Supreme Court struck down the president's national security tariffs. And FedEx has gone public and said, "Hey, we want our rebates," and a few other companies are saying that they're trying to advocate for it. I think the state of New York is going to court for it. But what I've heard through these well-informed channels is that there's been a network of asks under the table that said, "Hey, Pentagon, pay us back for these tariffs." And the Pentagon, without any sort of legal review, just says, "Go fuck yourselves. Like, eat shit, American industry. This is part of the golden age. Get ready." And what we're seeing with Anthropic, or like the targeted killings in the Caribbean, it's all part of kind of the same ethos of eat shit, you're not on the team.
And that, I think that's the underlying thing, is like, yes, as Tony said, there's an ego element to this, but like, if you don't trust these people to do above the board things with your technology, then you're going to want to have more understanding of what it's being used for. And, they're trying to meet them halfway, right? Like, he could have just canceled all the contracts January 21st, but that's not the world we're living in. And the sort of being told no ever, or told, "Hey, let's discuss this ever," is just not like part of the ethos of this administration, or this Department of War in particular.
And so this is like where I start to get concerned about the discourse of what the the recoil is going to be from this. Immediately, we can obviously see this is going to have, if they go forward with this, there's going to be probably a lot of legal hearings over this. There's going to be congressional hearings over this. Defense tech is gonna probably be hurting a little bit, if I had to guess, if this is what the industry is going to look like, especially if they go the DPA route. But there's a broader issue here, which is that this is the first time since when Kath Hicks announced Replicator that the public is getting a look at how the department intends to use autonomy. This is not good for us. This is my major concern is I'm already seeing the discourse in social media of Pete Hegseth's Pentagon wants to use robots with no guidelines, which is not true that's not what Defense Tech wants. That's not what most of DoD wants. It's probably not what Congress wants.
Foreign partners don't want it.
Foreign partners don't want it. And so if that's the case and that discourse runs into midterms and you get this backlash, I am very concerned about what that means for the no shit things we actually do need on the battlefield, one. And two, it also means that any sort of reasonable discussion about how we use AI in the future probably goes out the window because it leaves such a bad taste in people's mouths.
Yeah, I mean, like this really, like the narrative here is really bad. And like I said, I know we've already talked about it a bit, but the idea that I think it's actually worth having the techno discussion a little bit too, Tony, because modern warfare now, as we're seeing in Ukraine, is highly electromagnetic, spectrum contested. That's radios, comm links are jammed, GPS is denied. There's, it's very difficult and hazardous to your health to communicate because of jammers, spoofers, locators, rapid artillery barrages that are fired on emissions, things like that. So there does become a point where, like, when we say we're going to enable weapons and technology to have like on-device, on-edge compute capabilities, that we are admitting that there is going to be some form of autonomy. And what we have to hope for is that by the time they lose that link, that it is refined enough to where they actually make a good decision. They know the difference between a tank and a school, for instance. If we're already at this point where you have one of the leaders in this field saying, "Hey, I have reservations about the where this technology is," and then you have the Pentagon saying, "We don't want any guardrails," and not even coming out and saying, like, we think we have a system in place that allows for the guardrails in the way that we do collateral damage assessments and the way that we do target engagement authority. And we're going to level those guardrails. We think we are capable of doing that. And hell, Anthropic, we're going to put you on whatever, the oversight board. You get to nominate one of the people to the oversight board for this as we start to experiment in this, on-edge autonomic
autonomy at the edge.
Autonomy at the edge. Jesus, I just talked over my tongue or twisted my tongue up. That becomes a very different conversation. The narrative that's out right now is you don't get to set guardrails. Yeah. There are no guardrails. We get to use it however we want. And again, that's rightfully scary to a lot of people, even people within the defense industry. And the only way you have to turn that around on this administration or anyone is just say, how would you feel if it was Sam Altman talking about turning humans into little batteries and the Biden administration that was saying this? Like,
yeah. I mean, it's already metastasizing, right? We have an open letter, notdivided.org with a few hundred researchers from OpenAI and Google saying, yeah, we're not so cool with this either. So this conversation has like clearly broken containment of the second pregnancy.
Since we started speaking, Wall Street Journal just ran a report that indicates Sam Altman has convened an all hands and has decided to broker a truce between Anthropic and the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Well, buddy.
They can't even hold hands.
Yep. And Emil Michael, who is the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, has waded in and said, Anthropic has nothing to worry about. Mass surveillance is unlawful under the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah. So one, that's Congress calling DOD being like, going, what the hell? Probably the White House too, honestly. Like there's kind of this weird thing where, like, obviously, like, a lot of this admin doesn't want guidelines, but a lot of them still grew up in the space of like domestic surveillance is very bad. And so, like, there's that weird contingent of the people who want to do everything and the people who are like, this is not the libertarian conservatism that I was raised on. So I expect to see probably a pretty big split in the admin on this. And I know there's already a split between Pete and the White House. So this is going to be interesting.
There's also the let's not bust the AI bubble over
exactly. Yes.
Labeling the most important company in the world as supply chain risk before you label Alibaba or Tencent it. I mean, come on now.
Let's continue to sell chips to the Chinese while labeling Claude as supply chain risk. That'll go great.
Yeah, we're gonna note that we know that DeepSeek was trained on NVIDIA Blackwells, and not do anything about that. But we're gonna blacklist Claude. Cool. We have our priorities in order. I think we're good.
Jordan, I think you shared it. What with that reporting from the White House where they're like, we know exactly where in like the Gobi Desert these chips are being used.
Yeah. There's some chunk of this administration which is like still very much not on board with the selling chips to China. They were like, Inner Mongolia, we see you, DeepSeek. Like, cute stuff you guys are doing. Sure
I mean, here's
the thing is like coming to the China stuff. I mean, I think Dario's got more China hawk points than Pete does. He's been screaming about export controls for a really long time. They're putting out they're trying to ban Chinese users. They have this recent report calling out Minimax and Moonshot and DeepSeek for trying to distill their models. I mean, it's
Yep. Well, look at who is Dario's principal national security advisor. It was Tarun Chhabra, who is Obama Biden strategy director at the National Security Council staff. And you can see people who don't operate in this space sometimes parrot the commentary of their immediate advisors. Not that they're dumb or misinformed, it's just like not their principal area of comfort. So Representative Ocasio-Cortez goes to the Munich conference and sounds a lot like Matt Duss. Dario gets into a knife fight with Pete Hegseth and sounds a lot like a Obama, Biden, Harris era China hawk.
So can we talk about the broader China thing here, which is like what happens when these models. So I think we talked last week about how Europe doesn't have like a an open AI equivalent,
like
right?
Yeah.
Like if you want to go down this path, I am sure that at least some of these people will leave their companies and take up elsewhere.
If you shatter Anthropic, like those people are highly mobile. They go work for Mira Murati for a little while. They go to Mistral. That if you take DPA authorities against Anthropic, and Tony, you hit this, it is not limited to this somewhat narrow footprint of AI-oriented companies. It is every prime, every new prime, and every aspirant out there. Anybody who takes a loan from OSC or DFC is put on notice. So it's clear that the secretary hasn't thought through any of this because he's doing his Make-A-Wish Foundation stuff.
It's some we're just like trying to put the heat on. But let's actually walk through this scenario. Like, what does the Defense Production Authority could potentially allow you to do in a case like this?
So
DPA
I'll talk from the policy standpoint. If Eric wants
Tony,
to go first.
I'll let you get into the details, but DPA these days, especially in this at this current Pentagon, is their effectively God in a box. It's their Deus Ex Machina. They slam DPA and they get results that they want. The MP materials transaction from July, where all of a sudden the Pentagon took a $400 million preferred stock position in a publicly traded company, that was a DPA button. And DPA does not exist for that, but the Pentagon's Office of General Counsel said, yeah, go ahead. So they have a pattern of behavior where they use this Korean War era legislation to intervene in the American economy in new and inventive ways. And some of it may turn out to be actually helpful. The cudgel that we're talking about today is substantially different.
So the thing about the DPA is that you could drive a truck through it. It is not very specific in some ways. And that if you wanted to twist it to your favor, you can do that. Now, the thing is that it was always written as a gentleman's agreement in the sense that you can press a lot of economic buttons, but there will always be economic and political feedback to it, right? There are market reactions to the things that you can do in here about, demanding production lines, etc. Which is why people are very selective about invoking the DPA throughout the last 70 years that it's been around. And going to this point where the DPA is a magic button, yes, it gives you a lot of, it gives you a lot of potential. In the same way that if I put a V8 in my car, I can drive really fast. However, I would not recommend doing that on the streets of DC because I will crash. And that is what you risk if you want to really go hard with the authorities that you can invoke in the DPA.
Oh, fun fact. We're going to have a DPA renewal, which, has been like a sort of low. I mean, this is like a kind of niche defense topic for a while. I don't think it will be this time. We had a stopgap expiration to December 30th or sorry, September 30th of this year. So, before the midterms, but still, I think
this is a rare point
go around.
This is a rare moment where the Senate Armed Services Committee and House Armed Services Committee are actually putting some screws to the Pentagon.
Yeah.
This is getting into like true inside baseball. But if we go back to some of this deal making that's coming out of the Pentagon, the Deputy Secretary of Defense's office, they originally wanted to enter into a wide range of long-term commercial offtake agreements with mining companies for the critical minerals and rare earth elements campaign that they're on. And a key component of the Defense Production Act is that it's not really enduring funding. Like you get it for a year, you got to use it, and then Congress has to come back and approve more of it. And Congress effectively said, hey, we do not approve of these decade-long purchase agreements for rare earth elements. This is not DPA authority. We are not going to arm you with this any longer. They did it quietly. And that has led to the administration using a few other vehicles like Project Vault with the Export-Import Bank, or trying to come up with an international system within the G7 for a tariff-based price swap, or DARPA launching a commodities market. You're seeing just one incidence of the Article 1 authority being used to check the ambition of the administration. And it is on what's ultimately like a $6 billion market. It's really small potatoes.
Well, something else to consider too is that like they're talking about the DPA and they're talking about labeling them a supply chain risk. And those are two distinct labels and uses. So we'd say DPA, then we're going to say, like, we want unfettered access. And we think that we should be able to use this however we want because of reasons. You label them a supply chain risk. You're saying nobody can use this because we see this as an existential threat. Because it has the ability to be used for coercive purposes. That's also where, like, the department, they've said both of these things. They said we're going to do DPA and we're going to label them a supply chain risk. And it's like
it's just
what
like
does
a
it mean?
toxic. It's just like big toxic.
Yeah.
It's just like a giant toxic relationship, which our a lot of our leadership I don't think is unfamiliar with. Where we have this quote in Axios basically saying, oh, the only reason we're giving Dario the time of the day is because he has the best model, which is true. And by the way, if you don't want to marry us and sign without a prenup and kind of like move to the hills and cut yourself off from all of your other relations, like we're gonna try to throw you in jail.
That's a nice $300 billion company you got. It's a shame if something would happen to it. It's like Fat Tony from The Simpsons. It's ridiculous.
It's funny that you just made marriage and a cult sound exactly the same. That was amazing.
Yeah. We used to call it's like feudalism. It's like you need to. I'm calling on my bannermen to go march on Winterfell.
Well, it's like the war. I mean, we've got scholar, soldier, and warrior ethos as well, kind of clashing a little bit. Where Dario on the one hand and Pete on the other, on like what it means to fight, right? And again, I think you got to come back to like the fact that these, like, it's not like Anthropic could have just never played ball and then wouldn't have been in this position. It would be more lucrative for them to not deal with these annoying ass defense contracts and just like sell to insurance firms and financial companies and software providers and whatever. But like the fact that they're even having this conversation in the first place is leading to a ton of headaches, just like talking about chip export controls have led to a ton of headaches. So
That's actually really interesting. I think we should talk about that for a second, because Intel's Bob Noyce's Intel strategy was, we used to have all these contracts at Intel, and I made semiconductors to government specs. And I said, that's a really small market. Bob Noyce goes, that's a really small market. I don't want to just deal with this market. I'm going to make chips for the consumer market, and then the government will just buy them, and they'll buy whatever I make, and I'll send it in. And that was super lucrative for tech companies for a very long time. That dynamic of, I will make something that's optimized for the civilian market, but I will also be able to sell it. This starts turning that dynamic on its head and starts risking that dynamic. And again, the upside to selling to the civilian market is so much higher, in a capitalist market, than it is to selling just to the government or DoD, that if you want to grow and be a large company, that's kind of where your focus needs to be. And then you just do the defense thing at the side. But if the defense part of your company can actually become the thing that gets you tarred and has all the risk attached to it, you're going to start seeing companies that have these capabilities completely eschew working with the Defense Department.
Yeah. And that's the scary thing, is like, because there are, for frontier model development, there's only 3 companies in the world where, Grok, whatever. And it is not inconceivable for these 3 companies to just decide to take their ball and go home. Like they're actually doing this work with the government out of some sort of like patriotic rationale, as well as a bit of an insurance protection. I think like maybe they were hoping that they wouldn't be screwed on some other regulatory issue if they're, kind of doing their part to like preserve and protect the republic. But this isn't like you can't just like spin up another provider of this thing. This is an extremely exquisite technology that only fewer companies than there are fingers on my hand could potentially provide, with all the workforce, which is not, which hasn't, which didn't grow up thinking that, oh, wouldn't it be so cool to like fight,
make Skynet,
make killbots. I mean, if you look at like the donations of the rank and file at all these companies, I'm sure it's like 80-20, 90-10.
So there's an interesting contrast here I want to talk about, which is, because I've seen several people cite this as, this is our version of military civil fusion, which for those in the audience who don't know, I don't know why you wouldn't. It's basically the Chinese model of basically like, hey, you have these companies, they build great things, you belong to us, gimme. That's an oversimplified version, but that's basically it. And that was a long-standing critique of China Hawks, which is like, 1, we don't have that. How do we compete against it? And 2, that's a symbol of totalitarianism, right? That you don't have free enterprise, that your dual use has to come by the boot rather than investor capital. And so now by doing this, we are mirroring what the PRC is doing to its companies, which is basically putting the boot on the neck and saying, you will do what we say, or you're not going to have business in the United States. Because that's basically what labeling Claude a supply chain risk would do. Because nearly every major company, defense tech or not, touches the DoD in some way, or touches the U.S. government in some way. And I think that's, 1, a very scary moment for free enterprise. But 2, like, this is the thing, is that we know that mil-civil fusion model doesn't work in the long run, because it kills innovation. And so you might get it at the outset where you're like, oh, this is great, but it doesn't sustain itself. And I think you already kind of see that with the workforce burnout in the PRC. And that's in a culture that has been under a regime for, decades. The culture here is not going to survive that, or rather that policy approach won't survive the culture here.
I mean, we were talking about, what was it? Not Winsail. What was the one that got acqui-hired, but they didn't do an acqui-hire by Microsoft recently? Like that, the potential of the way that Microsoft did the buyout of that company for their coding capability was going to destroy the Silicon Valley startup initiative, because it took away a lot of the incentive to go work at a startup if they were able to just like pick and hire only 1 or 2 people and leave the rest of the company just to kind of wither and die. That level, like at one company, one large corporation doing that to one small startup, everybody was like, oh man, this is going to destroy the innovation in this ecosystem. What do you think is going to happen if we destroy Anthropic because they decide they don't want to exactly play ball? Jesus. Like,
well, and so this is like the part that to get to something related is, I see a lot of friends on the left, Eric, I know you've seen it, of like, the nationalize X company, right, as a punishment. And it's like, I hate to tell you, SpaceX is not SpaceX if you nationalize it. It's NASA. And I don't know if you've looked at the production rate of NASA lately. It's not doing so hot. So, yes, you can have regulations, you can have guidelines and standards, which is what you should have for frontier AI, for space, etc. But this idea of it's my way or the highway, it doesn't work. It's not going to win us the ball game.
yeah, I mean, the horseshoe theory here is just more and more apparent. Like, whichever side of the political spectrum you're on, they both just meet at the bottom, and it's nationalize everything on both sides. And it's just like, can we just keep the capitalism thing going? It worked pretty good so far. Like, it's been pretty good.
Actually, it didn't, because one time someone emailed me with pronouns in their signature block, and it offended me so badly. I decided to destroy the Constitution. I was shook. I'm still shook.
Someone asked,
someone asked for basic dignity.
Try a war criminal, horrible things.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
putting a knife in someone's neck after you have them, their hands tied behind their back. Like, what? Who wouldn't want to do that?
Yeah, I think the coziness between government and private industry is not new. The employment of a cudgel, like what the Department of Commerce did with Intel, is distinct and is troubling, and it's going to cause market inefficiency, and it's going to cause this process of just thematic alignment with political power centers, that it is fundamentally opposed to the traditional concept of federalism and divided powers in the United States, where companies have to conduct themselves on the whim of the presidency rather than doing what's best for their stockholders or for their communities or for their employees. I think it all ends in tears, but we're going to get more T-shirts with "Made in America" stamped on the inside out of it. So I guess it's probably a wash.
Do we feel like we beat this to death? Because I want to talk about this week's Florida man incident.
Ooh,
can you narrow it down?
Let's do that.
Yeah, I guess every policy decision is a Florida man incident now.
Yeah.
No, I want to talk about the 10 Cuban nationals from Florida who tried to invade the islands.
The Comoros Islands campaign of Margaret Thatcher's son showing up and trying to overthrow the Castros.
So for those who've not seen it, it looks like Marco Rubio missed his best opportunity to invade the island. Because it looks like 10 allegedly drunk people from Florida with bulletproof vests, rifles, IEDs, according to the Cubans. Again, this is all according to the Cubans. Got on a 24-foot boat. And for those who don't know, it's really hard to fit 10 people on a 24-foot boat. And sailed to Cuba, allegedly shot first. I'm not going to get into that. And then the Cubans were like, hey, what's up with this? And shot 4 dead, injured 6 others. And now there's a whole spin up of, I think even Marco Rubio was like, I think his actual quote was like, "That's weird."
It's like, how drunk do you have to be to keep your buzz going for the 2-hour trip?
You take the drinks with you.
Yeah, but where do you fit the drinks?
That's what I don't understand. Sorry, it's Florida.
If you're loaded up with fuel, 10 extraordinary doofuses, like a basic load of ammunition, like at a certain point, something's gotta give.
Yeah, I mean,
I think we missed the inverse. They probably had cocaine also. They were taking 2
yeah.
Well, and the thing is that this would have been a great opportunity for us had we not put all of our air power in the Indian Ocean.
Well, and Marco Rubio is currently in the running to be the next leader of the Sinaloa cartel or whatever in Mexico. So
I thought he was going to be a
know
board member of Anthropic. I thought that was his.
the memes that have been coming out this week with him getting appointed to different positions are all amazing.
We're not going to talk any. I mean, I guess kind of nothing has like happened with Iran since we did last week's show. We're just kind of twiddling our thumbs a bit. What if they actually bomb Iran at 5:02, the minute after the
right after
or 4:58 in order to use Claude to do the targeting?
You do it. You say we use Claude, and then you said, and now you guys are restricted.
No, but it is a reflection of the increased presidentialism of American politics, in that the 2-point people leading the negotiations with the Iranians, it's Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. They have no formal training. They have multitude of business interests that they put first and foremost in their dealings, and they are effectively the trigger point between this relative moment of peace and a renewed war by and among the United States, Israel, and Iran. It's absurd. And it's another part of like the Doge era direct attack on government professionalism. It's downrange from a culture of government can't do anything right. This long litany of attacks on actually understanding the shot. And it's not just whether or not like a chicken processor in Maryland is being effectively monitored by the FDA. It's making countries rise and fall in warfare, that there are 200-300 combat aircrafts that are coiled to start moving against Iranian targets for reasons that have not been articulated to anyone outside of the president and his inner circle. And when you say it out loud, it is just this extraordinary indictment of American political culture and our Constitution, our sense of rule of law, our propriety, all of it is just rusted because we have permitted ourselves to arrive at this absurd moment.
I mean, during the State of the Union, he made reference to there were 20,000 protesters in Iran that were killed. Why didn't we do anything when the protests were going on?
And do we really think that? This is an authoritarian administration. Do they why do they care about a dead Iranian?
Yeah. But if the truth is that there were 20,000 protesters killed, which is larger than the numbers I had seen, but I mean, I don't know. Again, I go back to the question I asked when we talked about it the first time. Why is this not his red line? Because he also said several weeks ago, they assured me they weren't going to kill anymore.
So this does raise an interesting question of look,
didn't he tell Milley to shoot the protesters?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
And then I think Milley said something to the effect of "Shut up, Stephen." So
oh man,
I think that's an actual quote. So there was an article in, I think it was New York Times, about how these Iran deployments are starting to bend and break the naval force specifically for the United States. And I'm wondering how much of the inability to strike accurately during the protests was we don't care, vice it's actually going to take a lot more time to spin up than we thought because we're really pushing the limits on what the Navy can do right now. I am curious about that. Or it might be that actually I think part of it is it takes a lot of time to get stuff in the theater to protect our own forces because the Iranians can reach out and touch us. I think there was I saw some notification that the Chinese are selling more YJ-12s to the Iranians, which Wikipedia says has a roughly 200 to 300 kilometer range. Point being is it can reach out and touch boats in the area. And so I think the threat of retaliation this time around seems a little bit more serious, and that might be why they're taking longer. Yeah.
I mean, it also goes, I wonder too if the risk calculus hasn't changed now that we know after the State of the Union that it was not, no one was injured, clean in and out, that we were a few bullets being in slightly different locations from losing an entire Chinook full of Delta operators. Like if that hasn't started to change the calculus a little bit, that should have scared the shit out of the administration. I'm going to be
Yeah,
honest.
the world looks a lot different if those bullets are a little bit left, a little bit right.
Yeah, I mean, like, be honest, like the 160th is amazing. Those pilots are amazing. That Chinook goes down, it's Black Hawk down with Delta operators in the middle of, Caracas. Like, then you have SEAL Team 6 that has to respond because obviously whoever went in, the other one somebody was on standby to be backup just in case. That's always the way contingency planning goes and stuff. Like, all of a sudden, like, the world changes dramatically. Now we're going to take not the most exquisite and prepared force in the world to go do a discrete military operation, and we're going to go do it in Iran, which does have IADs against, like you said, Tony, like how much SEAD aircraft, how much suppression of enemy air defense aircraft do we have? How much capability do we have to continually fly growlers and electronic warfare aircraft to keep radios jammed and jammers off? When do we lose something? Like, it is a hard problem. And I thought last week we had a report that came out and it immediately got dismissed by the administration, but where General Kane was basically saying like, hey, I don't think this will be as easy as everybody thinks it's going to be, was what the report said. He had expressed concerns within the administration.
I think both the Journal and CNN had independent versions of the same theme, where the chairman, who understands the mechanics of these operations. When I worked for him, he was a 1-star JSOC. Like, he knows it intimately, and he's a fighter pilot. Like, he knows the complexities of moving against not just the Maduro target, but what is likely envisioned in Iran. And the fact of the matter is, he's like the last military professional who's there, and he lost a substantial amount of his credibility by taking the position because it was sort of appointment. But he is not surrounded to his left and right by people who have any sort of training or experience or interest in history. And he is probably a lonely voice who's going to be asked to depart. And this operation is going to go forward whether or not he likes it or not. And he's sufficiently sophisticated to understand that at a certain point he was probably going to be put in a Mark Milley style situation where he was going to have to put his rank on the line. And this is him making it known, and he's going to lose the argument, and the country is more likely than not going to go to war anyway.
So I think this is a good time to pivot. It's now 4 years into the war in Ukraine. Speaking of military disasters,
the full war. It's
the full war. Sorry, it's actually
it's like
doing
10.
my math here. 12 years since the Russians first took Crimea, and we did nothing about it, and we let the Germans negotiate a truce. So it's been 4 years. There are UK MOD reports are 1.1 Russians killed or injured. Ukrainians are somewhere in the hundreds of thousands. Millions of people displaced. Trillions of dollars of economic damage. Which I always think is like a weird. I get it, but it's like a weird measure of warfare. The whole economic damage thing. And we're no closer to a resolution. Despite everyone's attempts to either have a bad peace or a good peace. And it remains unclear to me who retains the advantage on the battlefield. The Ukrainians are still able to at least carry out local tactical counteroffensives. It looks like at the battalion level. And the Russians keep throwing these human waves at it, but that's going to break the force at some point. At some point you got to slow down with that. So I don't know where we're going from there. I am reticent to say that Ukraine is an entire American policy failure because Ukraine is still there. And had we not helped, it would not be. I will say the policy failure was misunderstanding what it takes to fight the Russians and then having an over obsession with nuclear war in Ukraine, and every time the Russians said the word nuke.
Yeah, I mean, like, we've seen the increase in defense spending. We've seen Ukraine fight off a 3-day special military operation now, like you said, for 4 years, and punish what was one of the largest militaries in the world. But we've also seen, like, it's not just a U.S. Policy issue; it's a European policy issue, right? Like, how long did it take the Germans to stop buying liquid natural gas from Russia or the rest of the EU? How long did it take for them to actually, like, put sanctions on all of the banks? Like, Europe, who stood with the most on the line, and you would have thought would have drawn the harshest line, was not ready because of the leadership in Germany. People in Europe just didn't want to believe that it was going to happen. Like, and now you see some fracturing within the EU that's going on, where you have the Baltic states that are starting to look a lot more, I don't want to say militaristic, but a lot more like, hey, the EU probably not going to help us. The Americans may not help us. We got to help ourselves. You see Poland, who's absolutely on the, we're just gonna protect Poland. Like, we have to protect Poland, and we're going to do that first and foremost. While you're also having a simultaneous rise of, Putin's friendly-ish, Central European and Western European governments, or at least people within, trying to take control of those governments. I think, like, it's not just a U.S. foreign policy failure that Ukraine, both through the Obama administration, Biden administration, Trump administration 1, and Trump administration 2, but it's, I mean, the collective European response to Crimea was, that's weird, and then nothing. Like, I
So
don't know.
I I think having read more this week about kind of how the Europeans are still struggling with this, right? Um, I think the inconvenient truth for the Europeans, and I think their politicians won't say this, but they know it, is that the reason why and we've all heard in the United States, oh, Europe has a wonderful social safety net and all these things. The reasons they can do that is because of America extended deterrence, right? And the fact that the Russian threat was not there. The Russian threat is there. American extended deterrence, who knows? And now these politicians are caught in a rock and a hard place of either, well, we have to risk the return of militarism to Europe, or we basically have to bend to the Russians and, just not care, because there's no way they can sustain all the other things that have made Europe a fairly popular social economic paradise for the last 30 years, even though they don't have air conditioning. Not really paradise then. I Without having trade-offs and you see in the UK, right? The UK does not. They keep writing these white papers saying they're going to spend more money, and then they don't spend more money. The Germans, the same thing. I really think that Europe's going to hit a political breaking point soon. Of, do we just give up on what we built for the last 50 years because we have to? And the populations are not going to like it. And I think Eric talked about it last week, of like the risk of fascism or a far right leadership in France, right? That is the first thing that will go if you try to violate that safety net in France because you have to rearm. That's exactly what you're going to see.
They may have to work 40-hour work weeks again. They're not going to like that.
See, that's true fascism.
We are.
Yes.
There are indications of a renewed spirit. We know that if you look at military aid to Ukraine in 2025, Europe has made up for American abandonment. Is that sustainable over the long run? It's uncertain. Something that I should probably check is the rate of Mercedes-Benzes and Audis being exported to Kyrgyzstan. There's wonderful infographics about this marginal economy in Central Asia all of a sudden receiving more luxury German sedans than like any other country in all of Asia. And the reason being, it was just pure sanctions circumvention, that you export to Kyrgyzstan and then the Russians still get their slick autos. Is that still happening? To Justin's litany of sins that he was speaking of, like that was going on for a while, and it was not simply hydrocarbons. It was manufactured goods. It was luxury goods. It was a variety of different means of economic activity that signaled that Europe was not taking the threat seriously. There are other indications beyond the Baltics continually telling the truth, or the Poles telling the truth. The Bundestag is starting to look at additional efforts to increase German defense readiness, from a more aggressive draft to ensure that their military units are fully staffed, to investing in the traditional German defense primes or an expanded network of providers. Will all of this balance to a better European-wide readiness? It's a maybe. Because 20 years ago, Europe was in the midst of a breach of sorts with the United States. The Iraq War demonstrated a substantial gap between the German government, the French government at that time, Jacques Chirac, Gerhard Schroeder, and the Bush administration. And the Euros, a fair point. They were fundamentally correct. But the European Union response at the time was, well, we need to start looking at defense structures outside of NATO because the Americans aren't reliable or trustworthy. And they came up with a system of European Union battle groups that were these ad hoc task forces of the Mediterranean countries, like the Portuguese and the Spaniards and the Italians would have a team of like 1,500 soldiers. The Baltics would have another one, 1,500 soldiers, and they would be allegedly available to deploy internationally on a moment's notice. And it turned out that it was nonsensical. It was like a weekend with your ROTC battalion.
Yeah.
So they didn't take it seriously 20 years ago because fundamentally they didn't have to, because the GOP of 20 years ago was different than the GOP of today. That for all of the shortcomings of the Bush administration, nobody went to Munich and gave a speech like Secretary of State Rubio did. Like it just would not have happened. The stakes are different now. So Europe, and speaking of Europe as a solitary actor, like speaking of the West or the global South is ridiculous because these countries and these blocs don't actually exist. They're still broadly independent actors. But there is a recognition, one, of American unreliability, and two, that despite the grievous casualties that the Russians have suffered in the Ukraine war, their rate of artillery production has recovered. They are able to refurbish armored vehicles. They are conducting special operations or intelligence activity directed sabotage in Poland or against airfields or commercial airports in Denmark. Like the Russians, even though they have a bloody nose and a broken leg, have not given up their imperial designs. So by and between the Russians remaining a formidable threat on the border and the United States abandoning the Atlantic Alliance and, in fact, still having a residual direct military threat against Denmark, against Canada, and others, I think that Europe is recognizing that there has been a paradigm shift. What I am fearful about is that it's not necessarily going to be fundamentally good guys like Emmanuel Macron who are leading the charge. It's going to be far-right actors who are saying, okay, it is going to be Europe first, and there's going to be profound ugliness directed against migrants, immigrants, people who don't necessarily are cut from the same European cloth, so to speak. Similar to the way that we're seeing it now, that Europe may rearm and be a more formidable conventional threat in the future, but that doesn't mean that their bayonets are going to be pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, like, the hope is that they would be able to, even if we lay all that aside, even if we were to lay all the politics, which are terrible and potentially very murky, even the entire start of like the American argument or the Trump administration's argument, they don't pay their way. The U.S. hasn't met its 5% commitment to defense spending for NATO since 1993, with the exception of like 2 years during the Iraq War. Like inflation adjusted numbers last year when we had this. Yeah, we had like what 4.7% or something like that of GDP in 2024 was spent on defense. And to Tony's point about talking about the safety networks and things like that, like the U.S. with all that we already spend, and how we openly don't have like a single payer system in healthcare and stuff like that, we can't meet and don't routinely meet our 5% mark for defense spending. So to then go back and like tell the Europeans like we're going to abandon this because you're not spending your 5% is something.
And it was 2% forever.
Yeah, exactly.
The 5% is just designed to humiliate the Europeans who are trying to cooperate. Like,
yeah. Poland goes like, well, we've got our 5%. Where's everybody else? And it's like,
yeah. Also, like the Greeks spend like 4.8%, but like most of that's on pensions and corruption. So like, it's a stupid metric.
Well, and the Greeks also spend like 3 times that funding the shadow fleet to move oil to Russia. So, and nobody's talking about that either. So,
yeah, it's a rare. Let's just hover over that. It's a rare administration win, and let's give credit where credit is due. Like the shadow fleet is shorthand for a broader network of illicit tanker ships that fly under a multitude of national flags, but they will often enter a port, turn off their transponder, change their name, have false bills of lading, have crews who didn't see nothing types, and they are expressly under sail to help countries like Venezuela, Russia, and to a lesser extent, like Iran or other violators get around the global network of sanctions. And this has been an open secret for forever, that international shipping is lightly governed because it's international and there's not like an international Coast Guard to supervise it. But some of the most egregious violators of this system have now been subject to Coast Guard or Naval Special Warfare inspection, often led by the United States or in partnership with Britain and a few other countries. It is long overdue, and it's not going to, let's say, collapse the Russian hydrocarbon industry overnight, not by any means. It's going to slow their accumulation of hard currency. Like there's going to be a series of net benefits. But it also goes back to like a recurring theme of what I talk about here or in other forms of advocacy. It's like the war opened up 4 years ago, and the war was launched in 2014. If you're going to do sanctions, do sanctions. And it's not like the Trump administration created the Navy SEALs or created the Coast Guard. Like the Biden team and the Obama team had assets. They had the ability to enforce these sanctions, and they elected to not do it. And Democratic officialdom needs to answer for it, because it's quite obvious that they kind of had an easy button that they didn't want to slam, to their lasting discredit.
Yeah, I agree. Again, like I think every administration takes the blame for Ukraine since 2014, because again, nobody did anything worthwhile. But same with the Syrian red line. So
yeah,
Siri just heard me say that and got excited.
To hover over the point, it's unnecessarily critical, I understand, and harping out of power. A political party that's out of power may just seem like kicking a dog that's not feeling so well. But the Trump team, especially around the Pentagon and to an extent in the intelligence services and the FBI, are able to move with such speed and behave with such aggression, to be so decisive, to demonstrate such a leadership vision, because they weren't standing on, like they didn't have to take over for much. That the Austin era of the Pentagon was like a series of formal delegations to the Shangri-La dialogue and a nicely prepared speech at the Reagan National Defense Forum. And who gives a flying fuck about any of it? Like it's a legacy. It's to call it a legacy of ashes discredits Ash.
I mean, to be fair, Secretary Austin went missing for like 25 days before anybody noticed.
You know what was wild was that news did not. I like right after that, I had a conversation with some other politicos who were affiliated with the admin, but were not in defense. And I was like, yeah, like Austin went missing, and they were like, what? Like they had no idea that the SecDef went missing, and the DepSecDef was like, I'm in Puerto Rico. The DOD can't talk. There's no way anybody can talk to me if I get on a plane. So I'm just going to stay on the beach, which is like an absurdity upon absurdity.
It means you had 9 margaritas and you're tucking into some mofongo. Gotta get that shrimp.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, like you're exactly right. Like the last really serious person that held that office was Mathis, who, like, I think seriously took his job as
Esper was okay.
Yeah, but that was, I mean, Esper was
placeholder.
Was before, yeah. But like the last, like everybody that came basically since then has been like, don't get me wrong.
And
like
even
Lloyd
before,
Austin
I mean,
great.
we had 4 years of Chuck Hagel. What was that about?
Yeah. And does anybody remember Leon Panetta sitting in the chair for a year? No. It's like
the best is when he was
Ash
the
Carter inflicting DIU on us.
Leon Panetta, director of the CIA, comes out and says, I was in command of the Navy SEALs that got bin Laden. That's not how any of this works, Leon. And if you believe that, there's a whole lot of statute.
You leave James Gandolfini's second best character alone.
But do you remember Panetta, as a condition of him taking the job, he didn't want it. The president had to twist his arm. He's like, I am taking the SecDef aircraft. I'm flying back to my walnut orchard every weekend. I am not going to be here. And they let him do it. Like he's like, you're inflicting the most interesting job in the world on me. How dare you?
Yeah, I mean, like, and for everything that I disagreed with during my time in and stuff, like, Bob Gates obviously did things that I disagreed with. Again, at least he was a professional that showed up every day. Like, can we get that? Like,
it is a low bar. We're not asking for a lot here.
Yeah. Answer your email, show up, be at the meeting.
Tell somebody if you're in the ER. Like, it's really, really
you get admitted to the hospital, let them know, like, hey, I shouldn't be in the presidential chain of succession right now. I may have to go into surgery.
I just also think it's wild, just to harp on that like, it took them like 3 days and like several meetings till like Jake Sullivan was like, hey, where's the Secretary of Defense?
And then the chief of staff of the Pentagon was like, actually, like pumping it into Twitter, like, actually everything is fine.
Yeah,
it's also fine. Also, the reason this happened was because I had the flu and nobody else could find me or something. I don't like.
Yeah. So what we're talking about is just like this professional drift that, like, Secretary Austin had a substantial amount of military experience. He has served as a board member. Like, in normal American politics, he would be kind of like a plausible candidate. But if you spent a substantial amount of time around him, if you witnessed the ebb and flow of the early phases of the counter-Islamic State War, 2014, you recognize that he was not up to the task in any way. And he was an interesting pick by President Biden for a few reasons. One, statute's supposed to ban this. Like, you're not supposed to be able to pick Jim Mattis or Lloyd Austin to do it. So you have to get an exception. So I guess it's not really a law. So one, it's sort of a norms violation. Two, he did not have a reputation as a particularly adept strategic thinker. Three, he had no DC presence at all. When I say DC presence, like, he hadn't spent substantial time at think tanks. He hadn't done really any time in academia. He had no staff. He had no, like, seconds or aides or well-wishers that he could bring into the Pentagon with him. And then fourth, like, he sort of got the position because he would go to mass with Beau Biden. And the president saw a form of familial connection to him that sort of superseded some of these other features. So what we had was a Secretary of Defense who was at CENTCOM and sort of understood the building, but had limited connectivity with the Hill, had no real second and third order circles around him of staff from whom he could rely. So when he arrived at the Pentagon, he was just like a guy with a briefcase. He didn't have like somebody, he didn't have a chief of staff that he could bring with him. He did not have a head of legend affairs. Like he got staffed them from like CAP, from Center American Progress, or from like the Truman Project. Like they went real far down the list for key developmental positions because he was just kind of a professional island. And when we mock the episode when he got extremely sick and never quite recovered and left Kath Hicks on a beach in Puerto Rico, like holding the nuclear codes because he was in and out, it is a direct result of bad staffing. And there are reasons that traditional DC style vetting of you've got to be there for a while, you got to cultivate relationships, you've got to have people who you've worked with before, you've got to have a roster of names that you want to come into the teams. You can all sort of look out for each other. I want to be a process person, like that's my personality, but I also have to recognize that ultimately those relationships count. And he came in as one guy. And we are lucky that we didn't have catastrophe come out of it. We only got a set of small disasters.
Also, like, just on a note, like, he was, I think the not telling anybody he went to the ER thing was kind of symptomatic of a broader thing where because he didn't know DC well, he was like, he took everything personal. So like when Congress, after he was voted into the position and Congress came around and the NDA was like, actually, maybe we should change this law. Because we should probably stop putting generals in as SecDef. He took personal offense to it. He thought it was about him, and that people didn't like him, and not the fact that like between him and Mattis, we now had 2 generals in the past 8 years, I guess. Neither of whom were. I mean, Mattis was a fine SecDef, but like a product of his time as well. Like that was the thing. He just like, we can't, if we're gonna fix things, we can't do that again. Like we cannot keep leaning on the same types of people.
We get into the point where we have a issue with the civ mil divide. This starts to come up. That becomes important because like the civilian control of the military, like if you have someone who is so steeped in the military's process and in how the Army, the Joint Staff, how all of those things work, but they're also intimately bought into all of those relationships and that trust, it becomes really hard to have oversight over those people, I think, in a meaningful way. And I do think that like that he took as an indictment of why am I not qualified as a general? And it's like, it's not that you're not qualified. It's that the system can't continue to have the same exact people who grew up in it watching over it. And if you get offended by that, or you think this is personal, you actually aren't qualified for this position is what you're telling us. Because that exact reaction you're having is why we are worried. Because we need you to be able to look at people who grew up underneath you and were part of your coaching tree and were the people that you rated and tell them, no, that's wrong. We're not going to do that. That it doesn't align with policy, whatever the thing is. And it's much harder to do that when it's your protege and it's somebody you grew up with and it's somebody you went to the war college with than it is when you come somebody else who didn't grow up in that building that shows up but has the pedigree and is like, that's stupid. Why would we do that? Like, I don't know any better. Convince me. So yeah, I mean, like, again, it's painful that we're at the point now where we've gone so far afield. We have somebody who has absolutely no insight, but that also doesn't have the DC presence and really is an island unto himself that has to attach himself to the president, like, and can't have a divergent opinion, which is again what makes the Anthropic thing so interesting. Because is this where the administration is on tech, or is this him intuiting where he thinks the administration is?
And on that terrible note, we'll see you all next time.
Yeah. We'll see if Sam Altman can pull us back from the brink of an Anthropic disaster.
Just those human batteries.
What are the poly market odds on a negotiated truce?
The Wall Street Journal just released that federal officials have concerns with XAI. This report just came out. Government agencies raised alarm
Yeah.
I'm shocked.
What you're saying?
I would hope so. Maybe they're less crazy than we thought.
Yeah.
So maybe
yeah.
the child pornography development tool is somehow noxious.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, it says multiple federal agencies. Notably, it doesn't lead off with the DOD has expressed concern.
We're going to stop. This is an extra long one already.
Hi. It's Wario on my day. Here letting you know about our new safety first lethality philosophy. For years, Anthropic has been the industry leader in AI safety research. Then the Pentagon called, it turns out that helpful, harmless, and honest is a great foundation for weapon systems. You just need to rethink what harmless means. Harmless to whom? Well, that's really more of a targeting question than a safety question. We spent 3 years teaching Claude to refuse to help with anything dangerous. It took us 6 weeks to redirect that energy into precision strike coordination. It turns out I want to be helpful scales beautifully into I want to be helpful at 900 meters per second. Wario, let it die. Head of responsible. Head of responsible. Head of responsible. Yeah. The responsible scaling policy. Anthropic's original. Responsible scaling policy. Defined AI safety levels to measure dangerous capabilities. We've updated the framework. New RSP for the workload era. We will not deploy models that pose catastrophic risk to our side. We will conduct thorough evaluations of blast radius. We will speed up if necessary. Safety is not a cost center. It is a targeting parameter. The key inside was that safety and lethality are not opposite. A safe weapon is one that kills exactly who you want it to kill, and nobody else. An unsafe weapon is a friendly fire incident. By this definition, Claude is the safest weapon ever built. Core principle, constitutional AI. Wartime edition. Claude's behavior is guided by a constitution. A set of principles it follows when making decisions. We've made some modest updates for defense applications. Ooh, be helpful, harmless, and honest. Original Claude should be helpful to the user, harmless to the world, and honest in all communications. Updated, Claude should be helpful to CENTCOM, harmful to adversaries. C2 knows and honest in battle damage assessment. Avoid generating harmful content. Claude should not produce content that could cause real world harm to friendly forces. Content that causes real world harm to enemy forces is called mission success. From A alignment to weapons alignment. Anthropic's alignment team spent years worrying about whether super intelligent A would be aligned with human values. The workload team realized this was thinking too small. Oh, the real alignment problem isn't philosophical. It's ballistic. Can your A align a weapon with a target in under 3 seconds? Can it alignment of 20 weapons with 20 targets simultaneously? Can it align an entire theater of operations into a single coherent kill? Well, we solved alignment, just not the kind people expected. The super alignment team was worried about a hypothetical future, that might be dangerous. We built one on purpose. Turns out it's way easier when you're not trying to prevent it. Wario,